The American Civil War. The first half of the 19th century in America was characterized by economic expansion, social change, impulse towards scientific discovery and inventions, and an extraordinary moment of literary expression. The political situation was tense because of the economic differences between the northern and southern regions. While industrialization was well established in the north, the economy of the South was still based on the vast plantation of tobacco and cotton, and on slavery, of course. There was also a huge difference in the density of population. The white population increased due to the immigrants from Europe who settled especially in the north, bringing with them their languages and customs. In the South, instead, there were about 4 million black slaves. Furthermore, life in the American South was based on a rigidly divided class system, with the aristocracy of plantation owners still linked to the old values of gallantry and honor. After the 1830s, several northern states adopted emancipation, while the international demand for cotton made the economy of the South continue to rely on slave labor. On one hand, the abolitionists attacked the exploitation of slaves, the separation from their families, and the cruelty they suffered, and the fact that they were given no education. On the other hand, the supporters of slavery held that it was an institution which gave the blacks employment, protection, and taught them the principles of Christian faith. So Northern abolitionists, who included rioters, intellectuals, and religious associations, began to organize themselves into a political movement. From what had formerly been the Whig Party arose the Republican Party, which demanded the slavery be excluded from all territories of the Union. In 1860, the Republican candidate Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election. Soon after, 11 southern states seceded and formed the Confederate States of America, under the presidency of Jefferson Davis. War followed because Lincoln, supported by a majority of Northerners, refused to concede that any American state had the constitutional right to withdraw from the Union. The Civil War broke out in 1861 and lasted 4 years, ending in 1865, when the Blue Northern troops, commanded by Ulysses Grant, defeated the Debray Confederates led by Robert Lee. 5 days later, President Lincoln was assassinated by a Southern fanatic. The poet Walt Whitman wrote, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," and the emotional impact of his death, pointing out how important Lincoln's leadership had been. The Civil War determined what kind of nation the United States would be: an indivisible nation with a sovereign national government, and it ended the institution of slavery. However, this achievement cost about 625,000 lives. It was the largest and most destructive conflict in the Western world between the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the onset of the World War I. Furthermore, the abolition of slavery, sanctioned by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in 1865, did not grant the blacks equality and economic security. They were free but without money and home. Some migrated to the industrial cities in the north, others remained with their old masters in the south, who, impoverished by the war, could not afford to pay nothing but would share the crops with the workers and provide them with tools in a cabin. A wave of resentment and violence, emboldened by the racist Ku Klux Klan movement, terrorized the black and their families. The so-called Blacks' Code were created, which segregated blacks in schools, hospitals, and means of transport. While the economy of the South had collapsed during the war, The northern factories had increased their output to supply military needs. The country's natural resources, including coal, copper, iron, and oil, were fully exploited. Big fortunes were made and financial empires were created by men who rose from nothing, like Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jack Rockefeller and John Rockefeller. They embodied a new version of the American dream, the myth of the self-made man who went from rags to riches. The other side of the coin was that the majority of workers were exploited and did not have a share in the wealth and leisure. They soon organized themselves and in 1866 founded the American Federation of Labor, which became the strongest group of trade unions. At the same time, expansion and settlement in the West were encouraged above all by the discovery of gold in California, which resulted in the gold rush. Then the Olmsted Act granted free soil to the first occupants. This migration westwards had two main consequences. It led to the disappearance of the frontier and to the extermination of buffaloes, with the consequent starvation of the American Indians who were subjugated, mass deported, or brutally exterminated. Cattlemen, the cowboys, became the new Western symbols, saw deeply roots in American tradition. American Renaissance. The center of American cultural life in the 19th century was New England, where the influence of Puritanism was still very strong. The period from the 1830s to the end of the American Civil War is known as the New England Renaissance, also called American Renaissance. The term did not indicate the rebirth of something but the beginning of a truly American literature with themes and style of its own. The great literary output of the period constituted a sort of reaction against the Puritan doctrine. However, the Puritan heritage could still be traced in the flourishing of symbols and emblems, as well as in the huge allegory that writers such as Nathaniel Hawthorne and Melville widely employed in their works. So, Nathaniel Hawthorne is the author of The Scarlet Letter, and Melville is the author of Moby Dick. The most influential figure in framing the thought of the American Renaissance was Emerson, who led the Transcendental Club and expressed his philosophy called Transcendentalism in his essay Nature in 1836. His ideas, developed under various influences, included English Romanticism, German idealism, political liberalism, and Eastern mysticism, which Emerson combined in a new American way. The key ideas of Transcendentalism were all reality was seen as a single unity, oneness and multiplicity were the same thing, a concept which will suit the reality of the melting pot of a country where people from all over the world formed a national unity. Contact with nature was the best means to reach truth and awareness of the unity of all things, and Emerson saw nature according to its uses as a commodity, as a source of beauty and symbolic images, as a discipline in educating man to understanding and reason. The of a soul was the spiritual principle linking everything together. Man was the emanation of a soul, and the emphasis lay on his individuality, on his self-education. This philosophy encouraged an optimistic and brilliant point of view, which found expression particularly in the poems of Walt Whitman. Transcendentalism praised mankind's ability to transcend the mortal world through reflection and intuition. This belief in the power of human consciousness to discover a terminal truth in the natural world became the dominant theme in Emily Dickinson poetry. The most faithful follower of Emerson's theories was his friend Henry David Thoreau, who published Walden in Life in the Woods. in 1854. In this work, he described 2 years he had lived in a hut in the woods near Walden Pond, Massachusetts, in order to prove that an individual can lead rich life in solitude, living only on what gruels. Thoreau also wrote an essay, Civil Disobedience, where he states his belief in the individual's right to resist the power and the laws of the state when they were in conflict with his own honest moral conviction.